Imagine stepping into a medieval convent, only to be hit by the overwhelming stench of decay, rotting garbage, spoiled food, and diseased flesh. But this terrible odor isn't coming from the refuse. It's emanating from a princess, kneeling at the altar, who is revered as a saint. The smell was so potent that nuns would pass out, visitors would immediately vomit, and even bishops, covering their noses with perfumed handkerchiefs, would quickly flee in disgust. This woman hadn't bathed in over 2 decades, never changed her clothes, and never cleaned her wounds. Her stench was so strong it could be detected from 50 meters away. Welcome to the most unsettling tale in European royalty, Margaret of Hungary, a princess who, through extreme self-neglect, turned filth into a form of religious devotion and a foul odor into a path to sainthood. In 1250, Hungary was home to one of history's most unusual figures. Margaret, the daughter of the powerful king Biela IV, should have been one of the most sought after women in medieval Europe, young, wealthy, intelligent, and of pure royal lineage. However, she had a monumental problem, a truly dreadful smell. She reportedly reeked worse than an abandoned butcher shop in the peak of summer. This isn't just a medieval legend, it's a documented historical fact, confirmed by numerous eyewitness accounts and official church records. Those who encountered her described her odor as indescribable, capable of making even the strongest men sick, and worse than any known putrid substance. This was a genuine princess who deliberately chose bodily decay as the highest form of Christian prayer. The story of this extraordinary devotion began during a terrible crisis in Hungarian history. In 1242, the Mongol hordes, led by Batu Khan, were systematically devastating Eastern Europe, burning entire cities and massacring populations. Hungary's capital, Buda, was reduced to ashes and mountains of corpses. Biela IV was desperate. His armies were crushed, his allies had fled, and his castles were falling to the Mongol war machine. In his despair, he made a solemn vow to God: if Hungary was saved from total annihilation, he would dedicate his youngest daughter, Margaret, to a religious life for the rest of her days. The Mongols mysteriously retreated in 1243, following orders from Karakorum. Biela saw this as direct divine intervention. God had saved Hungary, and now he had to fulfill his part of the promise. In 1244, he sent Margaret, then a vibrant 20-year-old, to the newly built Dominican convent on Rabbit Island in the Danube. What was meant to be an act of gratitude transformed into an extreme and disturbing spiritual journey. Margaret arrived at the convent like any princess of her time, refined, educated, clean, and delicately perfumed. She wore colourful silks, gold jewellery, and had long hair carefully styled. But the young woman was determined to prove to God, her father, and herself that her religious calling was truly genuine, not just the result of her father's desperate vow. She aimed to become a true saint, no matter the personal cost. And it proved to be an incredibly high cost. Her transformation was gradual, like a developing illness. First, Margaret rejected her princely clothes, opting for the coarsest and most uncomfortable habits in the convent. Then, she stopped combing her hair, letting it become a tangled mess. Next, she abandoned all concern for her physical appearance, viewing mirrors as instruments of vanity. But the worst was yet to come. In 1246, Margaret made a decision that would define her life, death, and reputation for the next 8 centuries. She stopped bathing completely, forever. For 25 years until her dying day, not a single drop of water touched her body for cleansing. In her increasingly warped mind, bodily cleanliness represented sinful vanity and worldly pleasures that distracted the soul from pure divine contemplation. To achieve mystical union with Christ, she believed she had to mortify her flesh in every possible way. And what better method to torture her body than to make it a source of absolute disgust? What followed defies polite description. Margaret not only stopped washing, but she actively and systematically cultivated dirt and filth as extreme forms of penance. She wore the same clothes for months, allowing them to become saturated with sweat, urine, occasional feces, and other bodily secretions. She intentionally let food rot on her garments. When she vomited, which was often, as she deliberately ate spoiled food, she refused to clean it, allowing the remains to accumulate in stinking layers on her body. The smell from her body became legendary throughout medieval Hungary. Brother Marcellus, the convent's confessor, meticulously documented her life for church records. In 1252, he wrote, "The odour emanating from the holy princess's body is so penetrating and repulsive that it can be clearly detected by any normal person. at a distance of 50 complete paces. During liturgical celebrations, several sisters have completely fainted due to the unbearable intensity of the smell, and we are forced to keep all chapel windows open, even during the most rigorous and freezing winters. Imagine a human odor so intense it could cross half a football field and still make people instantly faint. The situation worsened with each passing year. During the brutal winter of 1248, Margaret developed open, bleeding wounds on her feet due to extreme cold and lack of basic medical care. Instead of seeking treatment, she deliberately allowed the wounds to become severely infected, believing that the pain and putrid smell of the infections were divine gifts that brought her closer to Christ's suffering. The yellowish pus, clotted blood, and rotting flesh created an unbearable stench that made people violently ill before they even saw her. Visitors described the experience as smelling death itself and feeling hell through their noses. The other nuns, initially admiring her extreme devotion, desperately begged her to wash, if only out of Christian mercy or basic human decency. Margaret adamantly refused, proclaiming it a direct satanic temptation. God, she believed, wanted her dirty, stinking, and repugnant. Any suggestion of cleanliness was the devil's work, trying to lead her away from perfect holiness. The situation became so extreme that important visitors began avoiding the convent altogether. Hungarian nobles, who traditionally made generous donations, stayed away, claiming they couldn't endure the stench long enough to conduct business. The convent's finances suffered directly from the princess's infamous odor. Even the Bishop of Veszprém, investigating rumours of her extreme practices in 1251, recoiled upon meeting Margaret, covering his nose with a perfumed handkerchief and declaring he had never encountered such an offensive smell from a living human being in his entire ecclesiastical career. Yet, Margaret had fervent defenders among influential Dominican theologians. They argued that her extreme stench was undeniable proof of her genuine sanctity, citing ancient saints who had rejected bodily care. Pilgrims began travelling hundreds of kilometres specifically to smell the rotting princess, sincerely believing her physical proximity granted special spiritual graces and indulgences. A thriving market developed for pieces of her infected clothing, sold as sacred relics. Filth had literally become a marketable object of religious veneration. In her final years, Margaret's body was a living testament to extreme neglect. Infected and oozing wounds covered nearly all her visible skin. Her hair had become a tangled, solidified mass of dirt, parasites, rotting food, and indefinable substances. Her clothes were putrid rags, literally stuck to her skin like a second layer of filth. The smell had surpassed any known human repugnance, entering realms beyond descriptive language. She died in January 1271 at the age of 46, officially from a prolonged fever. However, it was clear she had succumbed to pure self-inflicted filth and extreme bodily neglect. Ironically, her corpse had to be thoroughly washed and purified before the official funeral, marking the first time in over 25 years her body was truly clean. Margaret was canonized in 1943, becoming Saint Margaret of Hungary, the most putrid saint in the history of Christianity. She achieved her desired sainthood, became a legend, and is remembered 8 centuries later. But honestly, if you had met Margaret in life, could you have stayed near her for more than a few seconds without violently vomiting? Could you have truly venerated a saint whose smell made people faint from 50 meters away? The princess who reeked worse than rotting garbage forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth. Not all religious devotion is truly admirable or healthy. Sometimes, those officially called saints may have simply been very, very mentally ill individuals.